Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Some massive news coming out of this USC program late Tuesday night as Lincoln Riley tells the media star linebacker Eric Gentry potentially going to redshirt the rest of the 2024 season as he deals with some of those concussions that he struggled with over the last couple of weeks. And I think there's a couple of different angles in which you can talk about this situation, but I want to be very clear right off the rip that I think the number one priority is for the health of Eric Gentry on and off the football field. Many of the USC fans who've been rocking with the fellas the last couple of weeks know Eric Gentry is probably my favorite player on this USC team. I think he might be the best player on this USC team, but certainly one of my favorites in terms of how he plays the game of football. And as a college football fan, I just want to see this kid back happy and healthy on the football field. And whatever that may look like, whether it's redshirting, whether it's returning in 2024, whatever's best for Eric Gentry is probably what I'm not probably it was what I'm supporting for what is going to happen over the next couple of weeks. That being said, there's a couple of different angles in terms of what I want to talk about with this Eric Gentry situation. Now, before we get into it, as always, to the USC fans, I think there's a ton of different opinions that you can have on this situation with Eric Gentry. I think we all agree we want him to be healthy and we want what's best for Eric Gentry. Whether he's able to return in 2024 or not, there's an argument to be made that redshirting Eric Gentry and getting him back in 2025 might make a lot of sense for USC, but I think that's contingent on some different factors that I want to talk about. Now, let it fly in the comment section. Ton of different opinions that I think you could have. So would love to hear from y'all. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. I say it all the time, but I mean, whether it's the good, the bad, the ugly for USC, y'all know I love talking this program. The amount of support y'all continue to show means the absolute world. So appreciate you guys. And without further ado, let's get into this one. And, I think I want to start with if Eric Gentry is able to come back and gets cleared and it's safe for him to come back onto the football field in 2024, does it make sense to play Eric Gentry? And I would start with, I think it kind of depends on how it looks for USC over the next couple of weeks. I mean, if USC can beat Penn State on Saturday, you suddenly vault yourself back into that college football playoff conversation. Now, you make, in my mind, no mistake about it. If this USC team goes 10-2, I think there's a very good chance that USC is a top 12 team in the country and is making the college football playoff. So there is still that, I wouldn't even say hope, there's still that possibility that USC come the month of November is in the college football playoff conversation. I think you need to beat Penn State this Saturday in order to be in that conversation. But I think that's still a very real possibility for this USC program. And if that's the case, and it's safe for Eric Gentry, and he's cleared by the doctors to come back onto the football field, you got to play this kid because he is, in my opinion, by far the best player on this USC defense. He has the biggest impact on the football field. Now, where I think you can start having that conversation is if USC loses against Penn State and some of the problems that we're seeing within this USC program continue over the next couple of weeks, does it make more sense to say, hey, Eric Gentry, we're going to shut it down for the rest of the season. We're going to get you back in the weight room, maybe putting on a little bit more weight, getting you 100% healthy to come back in 2025. I think there's a lot of reason to say that makes sense as well. Now, I think the concern with that conversation is USC is suddenly extremely thin at the linebacker position because last week we had Rajon Davis announced that he's planning on redshirting, but returning for 2025, but he's not going to play any more games for this USC program in 2024. So you look at the healthy linebackers for this USC team and say Mason Cobb, Easton Mascarenas Arnold, those are the two guys that played every single snap of that football game against Minnesota without Eric Gentry. You can tell USC without Eric Gentry and Rajon Davis are quite thin at the linebacker position. And so who needs to step up for this USC team at the linebacker position to kind of endure the loss of Eric Gentry? That's kind of the conversation I want to get into. And I think the first and probably most fascinating conversation to have is, Anthony Beavers, who kind of made some headlines over the offseason, transitioning from that safety position to that kind of hybrid role, potentially playing linebacker. He's probably the next man up for USC. That definitely played the most football out of all the linebackers that we're going to talk about. Now, Is he an undersized linebacker? Yeah, absolutely. He was a former safety, but this was a kid that a lot of people projected to play linebacker when he was coming out of high school. I think he certainly has the physicality, and he has put on some weight to hold up as a linebacker in the Big Ten. Now, he's undersized at 215, but Eric Gentry is only 220, played linebacker quite well. And so I think Anthony Beavers is probably the first guy in line. But after that, it does get relatively thin. You're talking about two true freshmen that I want to talk about. One, Desmond Stevens, that both of these young linebackers for USC, like I'm super high on. They just haven't played a ton of football, right? Desmond Stevens played 11 snaps against Utah State. You look at Desmond Stevens, say 6'3", he's done a really good job putting on weight. When this kid committed to USC in it was December when we talked about him, long, wiry, really good athlete that we kind of said would probably need a year before he's ready to play linebacker in the Big Ten. Now, I think he's checked the box in terms of the physical traits, right? 6'3", he's up to 233 pounds. He looks like a linebacker when you see him in the pads, but hasn't played a ton of football. And it's kind of clear that USC probably doesn't trust him a ton because they didn't take Mason Cobb or Easton Mascarenas Arnold out for one snap in that football game against Minnesota. I think the second one to talk about, and probably the guy that I would project is someone that I'm really excited about, is Elijah Newbie. The USC fans who've been rocking with the boys for a while know when Elijah Newbie committed to USC, I thought this was a big deal. And at 6'3", 225, 10'9" in the 100-meter dash, this kid is put together. Another guy that didn't play a ton of off-ball linebacker at high school, was more of an edge rusher up there in Connecticut. This kid, I think, has some special traits about him that there's a lot to like. But again, we kind of talked about Tackett Curtis in the very same way. Like Tackett Curtis, physically extremely gifted. Part of being a linebacker in the Big Ten is knowing what you're doing out there and being able to play fast between the ears. Those are probably the two question marks about Desmond Stevens and Elijah Newbie you have. Like the physical traits are certainly there for these two kids, but are they ready to play and have all the responsibility it takes to play that off-ball linebacker position? That's probably the question that you're asking. So you have some names in the linebacker room that you could potentially lean on. I think the conversation probably needs to be had with Lincoln Riley and Rajon Davis, like potentially not redshirting because you're going to have a lot of opportunity to play. Like it made sense when Rajon Davis wanted to redshirt a couple weeks ago because it just didn't look like he was going to play much football for USC in the 2024 season. So it made sense to say, hey, let's get Rajon Davis back in 2025. We'll have an experienced linebacker that's going into year 2 of the system. That all made sense 2 weeks ago. But now with the injury to Eric Gentry, you start looking at the linebacker room and say that it's thin outside of Mason Cobb and Easton Mascarenas Arnold. Now, I think the bright side, if Eric Gentry were to redshirt, is that if he returns in 2025 for USC, I think he's going to be an All-American if he stays healthy. And so you redshirt Eric Gentry, you can tell this USC defense is clearly moving in the right direction. And then you have a guy like Eric Gentry coming back in 2025. If you're USC and say, all right, you lose against Penn State, the college football playoff hopes probably kind of dying down. Do you want to just make sure you're going to be ready to run it back in 2025 with a better football team? And it is no question in my mind that this team is better with Eric Gentry back in 2025. I think it answers a massive question mark you have at the linebacker position because Easton Mascarenas Arnold, Mason Cobb, they're moving on. They don't have any more eligibility remaining. And so I think depending on how that game against Penn State goes, I think the conversation there's a couple of different opinions that you can have, but if I'm a USC fan, I think it might make sense to shut Eric Gentry down, let him take the red shirt and come back in 2025. And as good as Eric Gentry has been, like I still think there's a little bit more of a ceiling for this kid to reach, especially if he puts on a little bit more weight. We'll see how Lincoln Riley in USC decide to go about this. Again, I think the first thing you want to say is whatever needs to be done for Eric Gentry to be healthy on and off the field, that by far takes priority. It would make sense though, that even if Eric Gentry is able to come back in the month of November, if USC doesn't have a legitimate shot at the college football playoffs, I think it might make sense to redshirt Eric Gentry, have him back for 2025, because then you look at having one, if not your best player on the team coming back for 2025 with this defense going in the right direction. There'll be work to do in the transfer portal. There's no doubt about that. I think it could make sense. We'll see how this is handled by Lincoln Riley and USC. This is part of the stuff that I think it's about how you run a program. Like, not only playing for winning on the football field every single Saturday, but how you want to manage your roster and how you want to build this roster over the next couple of years, especially embarking in the Big Ten Conference. We'll see how it's handled. Would love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Appreciate y'all rocking with it. If you guys do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.